Good afternoon and welcome. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Kaurna people, the traditional owners of the country on which I am currently on. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Following on from a successful series of webinars last year, we're delighted to continue to bring you more knowledge sharing sessions from experts in the Landcare community. Today we have Dr. Maxine Cooper, who is the Independent Chair of the Landcare ACT Board, Director of the National Landcare Network, the Independent Chair of the ACT and Regional Catchment Coordination Group, Adjunct Professor at the University of Canberra, and previously she was the Auditor General for the ACT, and prior to that appointment, Dr. Cooper was the ACT Commissioner for Sustainability and the Environment, and prior to that, the head of the ACT Water Security Task Force. Today she'll be discussing communities in the ACT region and how they're meeting challenges and maintaining and improving the health of their local environment as well as their mental health as individuals. We also have Danny Pittingill. He's a Landcare Facilitator and Project Officer of the Loddon Plains Landcare Network. He also runs a private consultancy known as Firetail Environments. He lectures at Bendigo TAFE in Conservation Land Management and was a recipient of the 2019 Victorian Government's Our Catchments and Community Leadership and Innovation Development Grants. He's also on the board for the City of Greater Bendigo Farming and Agribusiness Advisory Committee, and he's also done some international development work, working in Samoa, helping communities develop small enterprises such as beekeeping. Today, Danny will be discussing resilient and adaptive community-based landscape restoration projects. So yeah, a couple of great presenters with great presentations to look forward to. Just a bit of housekeeping prior to getting started. We'd love to hear your comments and questions throughout the session. We'll have some time at the end to go through those. However, if you'd like to submit a question or comment, you will need to be logged into Landcarer and type those questions into the comment box underneath the webinar screen. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Cooper, and we'll get started with her presentation. Thank you.
Yuma, hello in Ngunnawal. I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the custodians of the lands on which I live and from where I'm speaking today. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. Well, Landcare throughout its history has always responded to the constant challenge of restoring, repairing and protecting our lands and the environment. And this is in a world where natural resources has been and continues to be degraded, diminished and disappear. While the rapidly changing climate adds to this challenge, I think it also provides an added incentive for landcarers to continue their stewardship work. Landcarers, by promoting and implementing sustainable land management practices that benefit the environment, do make a difference to the environment. While this is good for the environment, it's also good for landcarers who themselves benefit physically and mentally through connecting with each other and forming communities and through linking with the environment, which sustains us in every way. Today, it's my pleasure to share with you how ACT landcarers are making a difference through their bushfire recovery work in Namadgi National Park, through the Water Watch program, Aboriginal leadership, rural adaptation, and through the growth of stewardship. Next image, please. The extent and intensity of the 2019-2020 bushfires was unprecedented. 17 million hectares burnt, 34 people dead, 3,000 homes destroyed, and importantly, extensive ecosystem harm, tipping some species even further towards extinction. 80% of the ACT's Namadgi National Park was destroyed, and the fires burnt 90,000 hectares in total. Most of this had been identified as significant wildlife habitat. Not only did the 2019-20 fires burn large areas, they resulted in large areas, including all of the ACT, being intermittently carpeted in smoke. We went into lockdown and to avoid that smoke. Little did we know then that our smoke lockdown and mask wearing was a rehearsal for what was to come, the onset of COVID-19. 2020 was a year of lockdown and mask wearing here in the ACT, as in many other places. Our Landcarers in the Southern ACT catchment group put out a call for volunteers to help in bushfire recovery efforts. More than 1,000 people registered. This was overpowering, delightfully overpowering. And in response, Landcare ACT applied for and was awarded grants, one from Landcare Australia and one from WIRE's Landcare Australia Bushfire Recovery Grant Program, to conduct a number of bushfire recovery efforts. Landcare worked with Southern ACT Catchment Group and the ACT Government in delivering the program. Once advertising for specific events occurred, spots filled within minutes, as we could only take 21 volunteers for each event because of the physical conditions in the park and COVID restrictions. The project has funding to May 2021. We are exploring options for continuing past 21 as this work is much needed. The project facilitates Landcarers on the ground doing things like restoration, weed management, habitat restoration, sediment control, riparian restoration, flora and fauna assessments, and water quality monitoring. There's been extensive media coverage, including on the front page of the Canberra Times, the ABC, Evening News, and Seven, and several reputable online publications. Importantly, volunteers who've been a part of the process have described the emotional effect of seeing the park in its current state. It was a visceral response. They have said that the opportunity to work closely with other community members and the ACT Government's Parks Agency gave them a sense of connection, gave them a sense of empowerment. Many have said they'll come back to the areas where they were working to watch the environment recover. My suspicion is they're also going back there to get their dose of the environment for their own health. Next image, please. The Water Watch program is a citizen science program that involves scientists, researchers, rural and urban people, and people of all ages. We here in the ACT have strongly embraced this program. It aims to help us understand, monitor, care for, and sustainably manage water. It supports community groups, community Landcarers to monitor the health of waterways. It educates and raises awareness in schools and in the community on issues concerning catchment health. It uses data collected by Landcarers to inform policy and on-ground catchment management. And it involves really fun things like water bug surveying, water health habitats, platypus surveys, and Carp Love 20. Carp Love 20 aims to have people count carp during their breeding season when water reaches 21 degrees, because at 21 degrees, carp splash and can be seen and therefore counted. It also produces a catchment health indicator program report called CHIP. This reports on the efforts of everyone and provides very important data for decision making. In 2019, the CHIP report, based on over 2,000 water quality surveys across almost 100 sections of rivers and streams covering the Murrumbidgee catchment upstream of Burrinjuck Dam, found, sadly, only 3 reaches were rated as being in excellent condition. It also found a deterioration in many of the areas. There was overall a downward trend, which is attributed to the upper Murrumbidgee catchment receiving 40% below annual average rainfall, a consequence of our changing climate. Information in the CHIP is used in environmental decision making and shapes catchment management policies. It's a very good example of the important work the local community can do to link through to researchers, to link through to the government, that then shapes major decisions being made around the way water catchments are managed. Next, please. Landcare ACT works closely with the local Ngunnawal community, in particular with a member group, the Burruwa Ngunnawal Aboriginal Corporation, headed by Elder Wally Bell, who you can see with the glasses on. Elder Bell is a member, fortunately for us, of our Landcare ACT board. Elder Bell provides leadership on how to care for country and preserve cultural heritage. The member catchment groups of Landcare ACT also work directly with the Ngunnawal community. An award-winning Aboriginal Green Army team was formed in 2017 by Landcare ACT, Southern ACT Catchment Group and Ginninderra Catchment Group. 9 young people aged between 17 and 24 formed the team, which worked on important natural and cultural sites in the ACT region. Local elders provided cultural mentoring for the participants, and conservation volunteers provided supervisory guidance. The participants were paid an allowance while being trained in conservation and land management and other hands-on skills required for working on country. The project had a focus on restoring the cultural sites in the region, as well as improving areas of natural ecological significance. The Aboriginal leadership won an ACT Landcare Award. Another example of Aboriginal leadership involves the recognition of Aboriginal cultural heritage sites on agricultural land. This example's in New South Wales and involved Landcarers from the ACT. The Vincent family in Sutton, with support from the ACT Ginninderra Catchment Group, had a cultural survey undertaken on their land to identify significant sites. An orca quarry was discovered. The family partnered with the New South Wales government and local Ngunnawal elders to record it, making it the 13th significant Aboriginal place on private land in the New South Wales state. Ngunnawal people now have access to the site. The ACT Ginninderra Catchment Group worked with the Vincent family and local Aboriginal custodians to run a series of cultural heritage walks at the farm. These were aimed at sharing knowledge on how to foster productive farming while actually protecting Aboriginal cultural heritage. The walks booked out immediately they were advertised. In these walks, Elder Bell describes the cultural landscape and how local Aboriginal community had used and cared for the land for thousands of years. Next, please. Now I'd like to turn to rural adaptation. A little known fact is that the ACT has a diverse agricultural sector with more than 160 rural leases holdings. Landcare used a Commonwealth Government grant to produce 7 high-quality short films that show the diversity of the ACT's agricultural sector, and it also shows how sustainable land management practices are being implemented. These films, referred to as virtual farm tours, are listed on the image here, and a link will be sent to all of you listening at the moment for these virtual farm tours. The virtual farm tours allowed the community to experience being on different farms, even though physically no one could go on the farms because of COVID. The films have been viewed, and they've only recently been done, more than 5,000 times, featured in the Canberra Times and on ABC local Facebook. Next image, please. Next, thank you. The virtual farm tours cover a range of farming activities in the ACT, ranging from an intergenerational sheep farm in the Territory's far south, where Landcare grants have been used to eradicate woody weeds, and just look how happy that farmer is that he's got rid of his weeds. They also look at other practices across the region, and as you'll see there are some chickens. The videos also, there's one on a sustainable pasteurised chicken farm in Majura Valley, and that is literally a few minutes from the Canberra airport. Landcare ACT has recently partnered with the Canberra Times to run a Life on the Land series, profiling the films and thereby raising the profile of sustainable agricultural practices right in the ACT's own backyard. At the heart of each film is a story of regeneration, innovation, resilience, and stewardship, something to be very optimistic about. Next image, please. Finally, I'm going to talk about growth of stewardship. I've shared with you examples of stewardship in our natural areas, the Namadgi National Park, in our rural areas, the virtual farm tours, and also across the entire ACT through the Water Watch program. This stewardship is critical to meet the constant challenge of restoring, repairing and protecting our lands and the environment. As I said at the beginning, in a world where nature has been and it continues to be degraded, diminished and disappear. And now it's become even more important given that climate change exacerbates all this. Climate change is probably our biggest challenge for humanity. Local community land carers need to be supported by local community coordinators who work with the community, for the community and in the community in an ongoing manner. These coordinators can provide support to community members by connecting community members with each other, engaging with the community to hear their perspectives and priorities, developing local land care activities, arranging educational sessions, arranging on-field activities, and doing mundane administrative tasks such as sourcing insurance and writing grant applications. Also importantly, these coordinators liaise with government to make sure that the community's activities support the government activities and both are integrated. Changes, however, in the National Landcare program from 2018 onwards has led to a paucity of natural resourcing for environmental purposes reaching the grassroots community level around Australia. This significantly affected local ACT community catchment groups. The ACT government stepped in and it is providing support for around $390,000 per annum in total. This investment has meant local land carers are supported by the local coordinators, and there's been an increase in urban land care groups. Importantly also, the funding has resulted in over $2 million worth of volunteer in-kind hours going to environmental works, and it's also been the leverage for being able to bring in over $2 million in grants. That couldn't happen without our coordinators. Now, finally, I'd like to thank the coordinators, all the land carers, everyone, be they government, non-government, whoever you are, I'd like to thank you for the work you do in terms of land care activities. I'd also like to thank Jane Ryan and Carissa Prius, who are my colleagues in Landcare ACT, for their help in this presentation. And finally, let's all of us remember, the future's not somewhere we're going, it's something we are creating. So thank you all very, very much. Let's continue strong in land care activities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maxine, for that wonderful presentation. I'd now like to introduce Danny Pittingill to present his.
Really wonderful to hear that from Maxine. Thanks, James, for that introduction. First off, I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm presenting on the lands of the Dja Dja Wurrung people today. I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this place, and I extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the places that you are tuning in from today. LPLN respectfully acknowledges the Dja Dja Wurrung, the Barappa Barappa and the Wamba Wamba people of these lands on which the organisation works, and I extend the acknowledgement and the respect to elders past, present and emerging. So I'm here to talk about resilient and adaptive community-based landscape restoration projects. So considering this webinar is all about challenges, I thought we'd start here and I'm just going over some challenges that we're facing in Central Victoria. So we're looking at, predominantly, we're looking at two different things. We're looking at land use and we're looking at climate. So these all seem to come together, but drought, drying conditions, loss of vegetation, clearing, loss of covers and reduction in fertility of soil or soil damage. I don't think these are anything special to Central Victoria. We all know about them. The reasons why I wanted to address these first are just looking at at what we're kind of facing. So hotter, drier landscapes, decreases in transpiration, degrading soil conditions, reduction in succession of plant communities and community senescence, the ability for adaptation to keep up, and interruptions of natural cycles such as the water, solar and mineral cycles. And ultimately what we're seeing fragmentation of populations and a loss of community dynamics and biodiversity through a range of, through this mix or this cocktail of challenges. We've identified this, and we've identified some trends and some effects of these challenges over the last few years. And the trend has been found in several projects. And now we're looking at ways to amend that, or ways to adapt ourselves and give the tools to our communities to better deliver projects in a meaningful way. So the things that we found are looking at soil condition, a lack of pioneers and colonising species, and that's kind of looking at what's being delivered as too many species being put in the ground that are relying on advanced community dynamics. And this result is starting to result in little success for plant communities that we're trying to support. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a couple of images that are indicative of these sorts of qualities. So this is a project that we've reviewed, and it's been one of the drivers for what I'm about to go into. This particular project we're looking at, it was a poor initial assessment. There was no focus on soil condition, and the focus was more on species that required healthy landscape function to survive. It was mostly, when we're looking at delivering projects, we're seeing that mostly it's influenced by availability of plant stock, and we're getting a certain kind of general plant community going into a lot of these projects that don't necessarily suit the landscapes or the landscape function or what these landscapes require. And so we need to play the long game. We need to focus on pioneer species. We need to focus on colonisers. We need to focus on the landscape condition in the first place, and start to allow for more complex plant communities to develop and support seed banks and support improved landscape function, which are all the things that we should have brought into this particular project on the right-hand side. So to do that, this is a project framework that Loddon Plains Landcare have been working on, and it's largely broken down into 3 different areas. So we're looking at assessment, implementation and delivery, and monitoring and reassessment. Again, these aren't concepts that are foreign to many people, but the reason why we've started to develop something like this is for decision-making tools for groups and communities. And the big thing that it does is it provides a structure around the why, and that's really important. So I've got 18 Landcare groups, or LPLN, have got 18 Landcare groups that we support over about 6,000 square kilometres in Central Victoria. So that why is going to change. And this might look really complex, but at the end of the day, the simplicity is in the fact that it is adaptable to a lot of these different groups and a lot of their purposes. The why might be very different. It might be a group's why might be they love to get together on every Sunday, every first Sunday of the month, and keep their social structures and keep their capacity for healthy minds and healthy bodies. What this does is it gives them a framework to also look at the projects that they want to deliver and what they're doing, and gives them some future goals to start to look at while they're doing that. What it also does is it looks at a diversity in genetic material and addresses landscape function. So as you go through this, it just makes you think a little clearer about this kind of long-term capacity that you or your group might want to build into the project that you're trying to implement. Other guidelines that come with this framework are things like spreading sources and provenance. That's really important, and we'll get to that in a minute. Including a minimum of 50% of the plant community, including 50% of the genus that are found in that plant community, focusing on outcomes for species that are rare, threatened, absent, and underrepresented. And that's not necessarily, as I've touched on, that's not necessarily putting them in the ground. That's giving them the structure to be supported when they're ready to emerge, or when that community is ready to kind of nurture those species that we're finding are disappearing from the landscape. It builds in capacity to monitor from the time of delivery, again, something really important, and it builds towards self-sustaining recruiting landscapes. So what we're talking about there is that's probably not going to happen in 5 years. We're probably looking at more 10 to 20 years, but the ultimate outcome that we all want to see are these self-sustaining and recruiting landscapes, so we don't have to continue to go back to them. So it's all good and well to put this in place, and it looks very complicated, perhaps. And so what has come out of that is the development of what we're calling the Plains Plant Selection Matrix. This is how we can support that framework and assist in plant selection for groups and volunteers. And this is where it gets this really excites me, because it can cross over between conservation and agriculture. A significant amount of our membership base are farmers, and a lot of the projects that they look at or we rely on delivering are on private land. So to be able to have something like this, what this does is it brings together 300 plant species in central Victoria, goldfields and riverine bioregions, plus the common species that are used for secondary agriculture applications. So it might be fodder, things like native pastures, if farming operations want to go to native pasture, forestry, shelter belts, and other kind of landscape fixing species. It provides a guide for planting and species selection through about 20 different attributes. So you can see just up the top, it's a bit of a snapshot of the first 5 that I kind of had captured in the database. But it just gives people an idea of what they can use for pioneer and colonising applications. If someone's got some salinity issues or challenges, then they can filter through those. Looking at erosion, so that looks at things with really good fibrous roots, for instance, and gives a planting guide for the stage of landscape function that you're in or that you're trying to achieve. It also allows users to select plants according to the landscape and the function requirements, providing a guide for appropriate project development, and it encourages greater species depth. So rather than looking at a kind of a nursery list, for instance, and there's don't get me wrong, nothing wrong with that, but it just provides a little bit more in terms of the depth of species that you might want to include in your project. So the first crack, down here in Victoria, as everybody's aware, we last year we were hit pretty hard by the pandemic, which meant that we actually haven't been able to get many chances to get this off the ground. So it was developed kind of in parallel with what we were going through with COVID-19. What we did have though was we did have one project that we could deliver under this framework, and that was at the Bal Lunette, which is part of the Kerang wetland complex, which is Ramsar protected. So this particular project, we designed it with the framework in mind, and it was designed in collaboration with the traditional owners and with the local community and the Landcare group up there. The focus was on native pine and casuarina species, plus the associated plant community absent from the landscape. The reason we focused on these, was particularly the pines and the casuarinas, was because it's habitat for the red-tailed black cockatoo, which is a really important animal and a totem animal for the traditional owners of that place. The project design implemented the below aim, or the aims that we've put in here. So when we put this project together, it had to include diversity of genetic material. It had to include species or provide for species that were absent or underrepresented. It had to use some different suppliers, and provenance had to be built in for resilience and adaptation. And we were looking at that 50% benchmark at a minimum of the plant community and of the genus within the plant community. It also had to build in a clear capacity to monitor from the outset. But when we were looking at the challenges and assessing the project, we know that we've got a changing climate. We had some pretty bad effects from long-term drying up around that landscape. We're in a low rainfall area and really sandy soils with salinity problems, and the big thing was we had a lack of abundance of species. So within that area, it was a 3.5 hectare area, and it had some different landscape function challenges that we had to meet. As far as the genetic diversity goes, you can see on the right-hand side a map to where we sourced the provenance. So there was 5 different areas in the end. We got some from the Loddon Plains, Terrick, Deniliquin, Bendigo, Mount Alexander, and the northwest, which covered Mildura right down to Kerrang, and I think it went as far south as maybe Oyen. These were all conditions that were very similar to Kerrang and to where we were planting, and so that was the reason why we wanted those particular provenances. We wanted to include as much genetic diversity as possible, which is also why we used all of these suppliers and the focus on the absent species in the landscape. So within the project, we were able to get things that just weren't there back in there. So things like cattlebush, sugarwood, and Pimelia daisy bush, as well as the Murray pine, white cypress pine, and the Casuarina species. So what this did was it gave us a total of 10 focus species and 6 that were absent from the landscape, and provided succession opportunities which were really lacking within the project. Monitoring was then put in place by, as you can see down on the right-hand side there are a couple of trays with different coloured plant markers in them. And so if we jump back to this slide, and on the right, you can see a kind of finished aerial of that planting. So every single one of those tree guards with a tree in it has a coloured tag in it, and we can trace this back to the provenance of where that seed came from, where that plant came from. So moving back into this framework, through using the framework and through using the guidelines that are attached to it, we were able to put together a pretty robust project that was delivered last year. And I was just on the phone to a colleague actually who was sitting on that lunette just yesterday and said that we're probably sitting at about 95% in terms of the survival rate, which is really good considering we haven't had a whole lot of rain up there. So I was a little bit worried with that little bit of hot weather as well. So the takeaways from this particular presentation, I think the really big one is find the why, and I touched on that earlier. Why are we doing what we're doing? That's a really big thing for us. It's a really big thing for our communities, and this framework kind of provides that. But it also provides that really good, rigid kind of structure to be able to change that why when we need to or when it's appropriate. Building climate and genetic adaptation and diversity into your projects. And we can do this by being selective with our provenance, placing an importance on seed and stock diversity, and making a point of including rare, threatened and underrepresented species in the big picture. So as I said, it might not be early, it might not be putting those into some really degraded sites, but it might be about moving towards that landscape function that will support those things. Understand what your site needs. So does it need some conditioning? Does it need planting, seeding, re-veg? Does it need fencing? It might be a cracker site and you might just need to control the grazing and throw some seed down to be able to make sure that you've got that genetic diversity in that if it's highly fragmented. And engage with the long term. So build relationships, implement, monitor, assess, and then return back. And again, as far as what Maxine was touching on, the social benefits of these types of projects are just out, so advantageous. So what this does is it doesn't just build. We're not just building plant relationships and community dynamics within the environment. We're building that within into our communities and into our social groups and into our social structure. And being able to go back 10 or 15 years down the track and be able to find a really good conditioned site that you've worked on and that your groups and your social communities have worked on is a wonderful thing, and we've got some groups in and around our area that are already doing that, and they're really proud of that. And that is it. Hopefully you were able to get something out of it. Yeah, thanks, James. I'll send that back to you.
Danny, thanks so much for that, mate. That was yeah, phenomenal presentation and a great overview of how frameworks can really deliver great ecological outcomes, and also highlighting the point that you and Maxine both raised about the social benefits as well as the ecological benefits. It's just great stuff, guys. So I'd just like to thank you both profoundly for presenting today. I think the sessions have been phenomenal, and we've got a few questions from people who have been posting online. So Maxine, we had one from Rosemary, and she was wondering how many Landcare groups were actually involved in your presentation. You're on mute, Maxine.
Oh, sorry, that's out of my control. Off mute?
You're ready to go, yep.
I'm ready to go. Okay. Look, many is my response to that. And what I've tried to do is, there is a very active Landcare community across the ACT, and in fact at times underwater, that everybody across the ACT is in Landcare some way doing something. So I would just say it's many. And for instance, in the last year and a half, we've even had 11 more on an ongoing basis established. So, we usually got around 60, but, there's many.
Thanks for that, Maxine. And Danny, you're supporting 18 Landcare groups, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. 18 Landcare groups across about 6,000 square kilometres. Yeah.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. We'll have to talk further after this, I think, mate. But yeah, so we've also got another question that's come through from Melissa, and she was wondering, or she's asking Maxine and Danny both, how can Landcare groups adopt some of your learnings in their community? Because I really think that adopting, say, the approach you've detailed today, Danny, would really strengthen groups' opportunity to receive funding. And if you're putting a landscape scale proposal together, it's a great thing you can always go back to pitch for funding opportunities. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I'll I think the other thing I'll say is be observant in the landscape and be active, and take a long-term approach. So I suppose on a technical level, the great thing about what I've presented today is that's going to be available really soon for anybody on our website. So we've got a big focus on the fact that we're a not-for-profit. We're funded through through taxpayers, through funding. So any information or anything that we develop needs to be available for everybody, and that, I think, is that's a motto for me personally, but I think we could do very well by sharing more of that information with all of our groups for success. The other thing I would say about that adoption is continue to develop, continue to look at your landscape, understand what you want out of your environment and where you want to live. That's what place do you want to develop for, not just for yourself, but for generations to come, and then lean on, as Maxine touched on, and as I'm one of them, but lean on people like myself. So Landcare, I'm pretty sure right across Australia, Landcare have got similar positions to what I am in Victoria, or the equivalent of. And that's our job. That's why we do it. We do it for the community engagement. We do it to talk to people. We do it to enhance the knowledge of people and develop the kind of knowledge in the environment and kind of landscape space. So yeah, really lean on people like us, and continue to develop your Landcare group. Find a really good Landcare group to learn from. You know, we've got members I've got some members who are members of like nearly every single Landcare group that I support, and I see them at every single meeting. But they're also the most knowledgeable. So that is a really big key for adoption.
Dan, I'd like to reinforce what Danny's just said. I think the coordinators are a critical part of the infrastructure, and they are so knowledgeable and they just really make things happen. So I agree totally with that. The other thing I admire in some of our Landcare groups is they're willing to actually step out where government's not an experiment. And, you know, yep, they may fail, but they learn an enormous amount and then they share. And we've got one particular catchment group that is extremely adventurous in innovation, and that's then shared with the other groups. We've got another group that really focuses more on cross-border issues, so we learn how to work together on that. And then we've got another group who works with developers. I think the key thing for me is to be inclusive. Every idea needs to be put on the table and listen to each other, and don't assume that the experts in government or the university know more than the locals. The locals will know as much as the others, and it's about the sharing and the interpretation of what needs to then happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, great point, Maxine. And Danny, I like your approach as well in terms of letting the level of resilience within the landscape dictate the interventions required. I think that's a really important message for Landcare groups out there, is to really let the landscape tell you what it needs, what intervention is required, and that's, you know, great to highlight that in your presentation. So, Maxine, I just had a question for you. Given the mental health impacts of COVID, and you know, there's obviously been exponential mental health issues coming from that. How do you see the Landcare movement contributing to helping, you know, bring those mental health issues out and resolve, as well as helping, you know, how do you see the Landcare movement contributing to that?
Well, before I answer that directly, I'm just going to share with you some statistics from COVID, because I find the statistics indicate what's needed, and I think Landcare is a big part of that solution. And some of the statistics about the use of green spaces. Sydney, for instance, there was a 12% increase in being in the local areas in terms of walking and spending money. So that's an important thing. A major increase in the use of outdoor spaces by a whopping 64% for local parks, 70% in bushland national parks, people were out more, and 52% said that they just wanted to be outdoors whenever they could with their families. So right at this moment, we're seeing a massive shift to the local outdoors, and yes, some of the national parks more widely, but people are actually searching these environments out. So they're identifying, I'd say now, more with the environment than we've had in the past. And I think they're doing this for their mental health. They're finding this is the natural prescription for being able to deal with the issues that's confronting us. I also think that when you're a part of Landcare, you're physically or emotionally, depending what you do, doing something to try and make things better. And we all know that in caring for something else, that can actually improve your health, because it keeps you focused on the positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points, Maxine. And yeah, there's no better feeling than planting trees for me. So yeah, I'm all with you on that.
As long as I feel good about pulling up weeds.
Oh mate. Yeah, look, it's been a great session. I'd like to thank you both so much for your time and for your, you know, showcasing, you know, the projects you've been working on and sharing your knowledge with us today. I'd also like to just take this opportunity to thank everyone who's registered and attended and participated in this session. And also, we'd just like to thank the the funding from the National Landcare Program and the Australian government as well for this opportunity to showcase knowledge sharing from Danny and Maxine. So look, I don't have any more questions to run through, so I think we might wrap this session up unless there's anything else either of yourselves would like to add.
No, thank you very much everyone for listening, and Yara.
Okay, look, thanks so much once again, and yeah, we'll wrap it up now, everyone. So all the best. Thanks again.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone.